Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fairfield County SCORE's live webinar on Understanding Google Analytics 4. Our webinar today is sponsored by Webster Bank. I'm Bud Freund, the webinar coordinator and a business mentor here at SCORE Fairfield County. I'll be your host today, and our presenter is Nalini Goolsarran. More on Nalini in just a minute. First, some brief information about SCORE. We are a nonprofit national partner of the Small Business Administration with over 10,000 volunteers nationally. SCORE Fairfield County has about 100 volunteers with a wide range of industry, process, and subject matter expertise. We offer three primary value-added services to small business owners. First, free one-on-one counseling, face-to-face, video, telephone, email, or video, which can be accessed via Request a Mentor link on our website or via the link on the screen. Second, we do educational workshops and webinars like this. And third, we have extensive resources on our website, including a network of subject matter experts at your disposal. Our next live webinar is Thursday, April 25th at noon, and the topic is Exporting as a Business Opportunity. Look for the specifics on fairfieldcounty.score.org. We also have a large number of recorded webinars on our website that cover a wide range of business topics. These can be viewed at any time by clicking on On-Demand Webinars. Here's some useful information about today's event. We have set aside time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button at any time during the presentation. It's located on the bar either at the top or bottom of your screen. Also, our webinar will end sharply at 1 p.m. to respect your time. The session is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be available at fairfieldcounty.score.org within the next day or so. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Nalini Goolsarran. Nalini is the founder of EdgeSpace Marketing and is passionate about transforming business practices and streamlining communications. She has a BS in Computer Information Systems and experience in IT, project management, and communications. Before becoming an entrepreneur, she was an Associate COO for a division of a global finance institution. She believes in the strength of her community and regularly volunteers for organizations and causes that empower the next generation. I'll now turn it over to Nalini. It's all yours.
Thanks, Bud, and welcome everyone to today's webinar about Google Analytics. So I'm going to forewarn you guys now, it's going to be quite technical. What we've done is pull together information from Google themselves explaining how to understand your metrics, what the differences are, and then I'm going to show you a snapshot of the reports and how you can interpret those reports. As Bud said, please put your questions in the Q&A section and we'll collect them at the end. So let's start by just talking about Google Analytics 4 and why we have Google Analytics 4. So why Google Analytics 4 matters. One of the things that Google's done is given us more in-depth information about how users visit and use our websites and now mobile applications. With Universal Analytics, what we found was you only could track one or the other, and then you had to figure out how to put your metrics together, meaning if you had a website and an app, sometimes you had two different reporting mechanisms, and then you're trying to consolidate them. With Google Analytics 4, you can now see granular user behavior, and you have what's called cross-platform tracking. Your web and your app can work together, your mobile app. Not every business has a mobile app, but we're seeing this as a growing trend as more and more users are mobilely enabled and are using their mobile devices every day for pretty much everything. What you're going to be able to do is try to create a seamless experience for the users. In the past, because these reports operated separately, it was often a little tricky to figure out, are the users going where you want them to go? If you have an e-commerce site, are users landing on the products that you want? You can then see on the websites which products are performing better versus on the app if you have a mobile app for your store. The other thing that Google has done is, as they put it, future proof the features, meaning they've included machine learning and predictive analytics. I'm still yet to see too many details on how those work within the Google Analytics, meaning the analytics they give you, the predictive learning and stuff. It always says, stay tuned for insights, but I haven't seen any insights just yet come out of any of the reports. Maybe they're not fine tuned enough. Maybe Google's still working on it. Some of the features are still under development. So you kind of have to take a look at it periodically and see what you get. The other big thing about Google Analytics 4 and why it came about has a lot to do with data privacy. Google paid hefty fines in the past few years, especially in the European Union, for violations of data privacy laws. They have some of the biggest data privacy concerns around the world. And so we use that as kind of the standard for how we track data privacy and how we use data. So, what that means is a lot of the reports that we had in the past that were very specific around user behavior, user geography, IP addresses, those kind of things, we're no longer going to get because technically we weren't supposed to have them in the first place. So Google changed their analytics method and methodology to comply with the global data privacy laws using GDPR as a starting point. And then as other countries begin to adopt more stringent data privacy rules, we're finding that the reports are going to give us information in a different manner in order for us to get the insights we need while still being in compliance with the law. Why does that matter for you as a business owner? Although it's Google, you're technically liable for how Google is using said user's information. And so if a user has concerns and those kind of things, you definitely have to make sure that your terms and conditions on your website or your privacy policy at least says that you're collecting Google Analytics, because we do have to be transparent about that level of tracking. So let's get into the key differences. One of the basic things that we find is, here are the things that are still the same between the two systems, are Universal Analytics and GA4. And you'll see Universal Analytics, which is the original Google Analytics, referred to as UA, and Google Analytics 4 referred to as GA4. So the things that have remained the same are basic tracking, goal tracking, segmentation of data, basic reporting, and user management. I know that's kind of vague, but in a little bit, we're going to get into some of those reports, what the metrics are, and I'm going to give you a breakdown of what the metrics look like and Universal Analytics, and then what the metrics look like today in Google Analytics. And this is information directly from Google so that you can see how Google is actually stating the information for you. So starting off with Universal Analytics had session-based data modeling. You had an extensive report library. The reports are slightly different in the new library based on the new data privacy laws. You had custom dimensions and metrics. You had advanced attribution models. The attributions a lot of times were more relevant to the folks running Google Ads, because you want to create those attribution metrics as you need them. And then Data Studio integration. What we have now with Google Analytics 4 is what's called event-based data modeling. We mentioned cross-platform measurements, machine learning powered insights, privacy focused, and customizable dashboards. The big thing here is event-based data modeling. Events, and we're going to get into what events are, but what they're trying to track, instead of just saying someone came to your website, which is all we found out with Google Analytics, Universal Analytics, in GA4, we now get some details around, did users actually do anything when they came to my website? So now you can get a sense of what they're doing or how they're using your website. So let's get into that a little bit. So let's first start by comparing the metrics. What is the difference between how a metric was and how the metric is now being either counted or even being called? And those of you who are very familiar with Universal Analytics, not sure how to find that same metric in Google Analytics 4, we'll now get into that. So starting off with users, the biggest part of being the reports are how Google tracks user metrics. Universal Analytics had two metrics: total users and new users. So essentially, all they were saying is the total number of unique users who logged an event. An event at that time with Universal Analytics was they landed on your website. If you had ads and conversions turned on, you might have a few more detail points, but most users for service based businesses who didn't do Google Ads may not have customized the report very detailed. And so what it resulted in was just a general total of these number of users came to your website during this time frame. And then of course tracking the new users during that same time frame, because one of the things you want to keep an eye on is returning users. Returning users is a good thing because that's called stickiness. They're coming back to your business. And if you're an e-commerce business, you definitely want to have a lot of returning users. Service-based businesses may not have as many returning users looking at their services, but maybe they're looking for their address, their phone number, their hours. And a lot of times they can now get that from your Google My Business listing. So they may not come to your website. So that event account won't be there for you. What we're finding in Google Analytics 4 is there are now 3 user metrics. You still have your total users, you still have your new users. Those two haven't changed. They've introduced this third metric, which is the primary driving metric called active users. What Google is now realizing is a lot of time people open a website and they may not actually be actively using said website. I do it all the time. I open a new web page in a new browser or a new tab and the phone rings or I have to jump on a call and that web page is sitting open for a very long time and I'm actually not doing anything on it. In the old Universal Analytics, sometimes that would actually count as an event count. And then you have a skewed number of quote unquote engaged users because all you had was total users. Google Analytics 4 is now prioritizing users who are, active using the website. They're scrolling, they're clicking buttons, they're moving through the website. Those are some of the things Google is tracking now. So now active users, user activity becomes a driving number. And this helps you understand, are people actually using your website the way you expected them to? When we talk about sessions, so a single user generates a session. One user can generate more than one session. So this is where your returning users come in. I click on a website today, I generated a session. I close the website. I open the website again 2 hours later, 2 days later. I've now generated a second session, but I am now a returning user. So that is what the term session is. It's basically the time that a user accesses your website. So in Universal Analytics, the session ended when there's been no activity for more than 30 minutes or your session timeout settings. There was a default setting for that. And oftentimes it was like it said here 30 minutes, or if you customized it. And then if a set user comes back after the session timeout, it will start a new session. So someone like me that opened a tab, started a session, I got busy, didn't do anything with said session, came back later, reactivated the tab, I've now started a new session. If I'm still on the website when midnight arrives, a new session will be started. So sometimes when you're looking at your numbers in your old analytics, you would see things like, 100 users generated 200 sessions. Here are some of the factors that played into that. They came, they left, they reactivated their window. The window was still open after midnight. That can get a little skewed, the time zone or the midnight number because of your time zone and the user time zone. So depending on how you're tracking that, you could be looking at it right now in your time zone, but the user, it might be in Chicago, which is an hour behind us here in New York. And so that could shift it. So just something to keep in mind if you're looking at that number. And then, of course, if you're running Google Ads or if you set up campaign parameters, a new session is started based on how you've configured that. Again, we'll call that advanced level metrics for those who are using such features. So then in Google Analytics, we have what's called session start. It's not just session. Google is, again, active users and focusing on session start. This is a very complicated answer from Google in terms of what that means, but basically a user logs in and generates what's called a session ID, and the analytics associated with that event creates a subsequent session. So essentially what Google is saying is user level behavior. It's not just the computer, it is actually how it all connects. And this might be complicated, but the simplest way to think about this is a user came to your website and started a session. The session will end when there's been no activity for more than 30 minutes and depending on your session timeout settings. That hasn't changed from the old analytics to the new analytics. And then the sessions aren't restarted at midnight or when you parameters are encountered. So what Google's trying to prevent here is that double counting. So now if I'm still on the website between tonight and tomorrow, I'm still one user, one session. And that was a problem with the old analytics where the numbers can get skewed because you had the window open past midnight. So that's the key difference here. And then, of course, if a user comes back after a session timeout, it will start a new session. Just because they left, they came back. So this is your returning user. So when we talk about session traffic-based acquisition metrics, acquisition is how you get your customers. So whether that is from, that could come from Google search, that could come from social media, that could be direct. There's any number of ways that you can acquire your user. So what Google Analytics universally used to say was, if it was found in the acquisition section in a number of different reports, such as a channel report, and it's called a source media, meaning where did they come from, the source of their connection to your website. There were dimensions of how they analyzed it, such as users and sessions. So what that meant was they were saying, again, so many users generated so many sessions, came from so many places. And of course, the default attribution look back was 6 months. This again is more for those who are running campaigns for Google Ads and such. When you're looking at Google Analytics 4, according to Google, the main difference is how they align the metrics with users or session. Remember, the key driving metric is active users. So they won't necessarily count how you're acquiring your numbers based on just they opened a tab. They're now looking to see for those active users so that you're getting more detailed information around how users are using your website. Traffic acquisition metrics can be found in the traffic acquisition report, whereas before it was spread out against the source medium report. So this is the key difference. You now don't have necessarily a source medium report. You have what's called traffic acquisition report. The dimensions of channel or source mediums are measured against metrics such as users and sessions. This hasn't changed much from the old one. They still are saying so many users came to your website generating so many sessions from so many sources. So one user could come from social media, and the same user can come from Google search, and the same user can come from your email newsletter, all of which generate individual sessions, all of which will show up individually on your traffic acquisition report, especially if the user is active, not just arriving on your website and leaving. So when we talk about page views, so your website, depending on how it's built, has multiple pages. There is something called a single page website. Those are websites that where the tabs at the top, you click about and it jumps to a section, services jump to the next section, so on and so forth, but it's within the single page. Now, in the world of SEO, multi-page websites give you better user traction, give you better SEO performance. However, for many reasons, businesses and clients, consumers decide that they want a single page website for simplicity. Sometimes it's a cost factor. Sometimes they don't have a big enough business or service offering to warrant a multi-page website. So when they're talking about page views, we're talking about individual pages on your website. So if you have a single page website, meaning it's just a continuous scroll, you will only have one type of page to be viewed. Those sections won't count as page views. So this report will not be useful for you. Per Google, the page views are fairly close between the two. Now, that's a direct quote from Google in terms of what fairly means. It's to be determined. The way I understand it is that they're pretty much the same. I mean, unless you have a very, very deep understanding of how this works. For I think to the common user who's not overly technical with Google Analytics, it's going to look the same as your old reports. So we start by comparing page views. This is the total number of pages viewed, and repeated views of a single page is counted. So imagine somebody lands on your homepage. That's one page view for your homepage. They click on About Us. That's one page view for About Us. Suppose they click back to the homepage. That's a second page view for the homepage. And if they click back to About Us, that's a second page view for the About Us. So that's what page view means. Unique page views is the number of pages that are viewed without being duplicated. So in this case, The example is the same where it's home generates one page, about generates another page view, and then they go back and forth. But you will sometimes be able to see in the unique page views, you'll see one click each instead of two in terms of your account. Your user metrics for Google Analytics 4, you have views, and the views is broken down a little further. This is a combination of page views and screen views. And so this is where those of you who have mobile applications in addition to your website count, right? So in the old analytics, you just had page views, whether they were looking at it through your website and or your mobile app. Now you're looking at it a little differently and you're seeing the repeated views of the single screen count. So you're getting a more accurate measure. You don't have to worry about unique versus total. They're all basically the same, and it's combining page views and screen views. So depending on how you have your mobile app built and how it aligns with your website, they're going to look the same in your report. One of the biggest difference for Google Analytics 4 is this notion of events. And this is going to talk about key events, and then later I'll get on to like events and what that means. In Universal Analytics, you would define a goal in terms of what you want someone to do as your conversion. And that hasn't changed too much in Google Analytics 4. You still have to set your goals, but now you have something called key events. But your goal would be, in this case, the example given by Google was form submit. It could also be phone, the number was clicked to call, the email was clicked, those type of things. Sometimes purchase, or definitely purchase if you have an e-commerce website. Things to think about on that front. In Universal Analytics, it only counts one conversion per session for each goal. So say you've defined form submit and purchase a product as your conversion point. Remember, one user generates one session at a time. In that same session, whichever one of those conversion points happened first was the only thing that counted in your report. What you'll find in Google Analytics 4 is that now you can get two counts for the same thing. If they submitted the form and they purchased a product, you will then get two conversion counts, two key event counts. So now you're getting more accurate reporting in terms of how your users are converting on your website. And of course, as I skipped one here, but you would specify the key event for each action that you want. So as I mentioned before, same thing like you did with Universal Analytics. It was, I want the form submit to count. I want a purchase to count. By default, Google does count events, general events. This is more about if you're tracking conversion down to that granular level. Bounce rate was a very important metric in Universal Analytics. What this did was give us a sense of, did somebody come to our website and leave immediately? The way that I describe this is, consider a bouncing ball. A ball hits the surface and it leaves immediately, creates what's called a bounce. Someone lands on your website and they leave almost immediately. That creates a bounce. So the way Universal Analytics calculated this was the percentage of a single page session in which there was no interaction on the page, meaning your website, they landed on your website and they stayed either 0 seconds, or we used to say the metric was 10 seconds. But the reality is that they never left your homepage. So those folks who have single page websites often saw a really, really high bounce rate because there was no other page for them to go to. And so Google said they came and they didn't click anything. Notice the last part of that statement. The user came for several minutes, but leaves without clicking any links or triggering any events to record an interaction. So again, if they're on a single page website and they don't click any of the tabs and they just scrolled all the way down, you didn't really get an accurate view of how they interacted with your website. With Google Analytics, we actually get what's the inverse of it, which is called the engagement rate. Because bounce rate was very confusing in Universal Analytics, you had to think about bounce. If you were technical, you were familiar with the term, but non-technical individuals struggled with this concept of bouncing. So what they've done is given us the inverse, which is really the engagement rate. Rather than telling us the percentage of time that people came to the website and did nothing, they're instead telling us, here's the percentage of time that people came to your website and did something. Because people used to misinterpret the bounce rate as, 100% bounce rate being good because it was 100, when in fact 100 was negative, because 100% of the time someone came and left within 0 seconds, or 100% of the time someone came and didn't do anything on the website before they left. So now what they're telling us is instead, they're saying, you know what? Let's give you some more meaningful information that's less confusing, and let's talk about how often users are engaged. So if your user visits your website, reviews the content on your homepage for less than 10 seconds, and then leaves without triggering any event, the session will count as a bounce. But what you will see again in your report is the inverse. You'll actually see the engagement rate. So if 10 users came to your website and 9 users engaged, that's a 90% engagement rate versus before you would have seen that as a 10% bounce rate. An engaged session, just to reconfirm, is a session that lasts 10 seconds or longer, has one or more key event, or has 2 or more page or screen views. So for those of you familiar with your SEO and you're looking to drive up your organic numbers, it's very common that you have your friends and family help you generate traffic to your website, especially when it's brand new. If you have users coming to your website, in terms of whether it's leaving you a review, gathering your contact details, you hope that they stay for more than 10 seconds, and you definitely want them to either, hit one of your key events and definitely go to 2 or more pages or screens if it's on your mobile app. And then lastly, if a user doesn't have an engaged session, that is, they don't meet any of the criteria for what's considered an engaged session, Google Analytics counts that as a bounce, as we said before. So basically, they came, they didn't click anything, and they left. That's the metric that you always want to think about, is that user engagement. You want them to come to your website and do something. So now that I've kind of told you what these metrics are, let's go through some of the reports so that I can show you how to interpret the new Google Analytics 4 reports. So first things first, when you land on your Google Analytics page, there's something called a report snapshot. When you click view report snapshot, it gives you a little bit more detailed report. Here we're seeing that in the last 28 days, there was 205 users. You'll also notice that it says there's a 24% down, meaning comparing to the same preceding period. So the 28 days prior, there was 24% more users to this website. These 205 users generated an event count of 969. An event count are things like they scrolled, they clicked, they played a video, they clicked through a photo carousel, they clicked on a button. An event is basically where the user's engaging with your website. So if you have users that land on a website, and I see this often where folks have a single page or a home page that doesn't have a lot of information, with the expectation that users will click further into the website to get more information, this is where you'll start to get a sense of, are they actually doing that? Because if your event counts are low, that means they may not be actually doing anything further. They might think that, oh, this is it for the homepage, and leave. This is how you use that event count metric to figure out if people are actually doing things on your website. There's key events if you have them defined. For this particular website, we do not have key events defined. We're going with the basic generic event count, which is scroll, clicks, play video, go through media carousels. Those are generally what we look for. We didn't necessarily need deeper key events for this particular website. And of course, here's our new users. So that means that of all of the users that came to this website in the last 25 days, 5 of them are returning users, which is good because you want people to come back to your website. Now, if you yourself are looking at your website as you're doing maintenance or just checking on things, you're generating some of those numbers too, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is all part of your organic traffic that helps you rise in your Google rankings. So it's the more returning users you have, it's good. And new users are also even greater. So then when you look at your engagement overview, in your reporting in your Google Analytics, there's a section called engagement. In the overview section, you have the average engagement time. So as I mentioned earlier, Google is really focused on that active user. So now we have an average engagement time of 28 seconds, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in the world of technology, it's actually a lot when you think about the fact human attention span these days are calculated at 8 seconds. Social media has changed how users use technology and they have very short attention span. They want their information much easier, much quicker. And so 28 seconds is a long time when someone's on your website. Often they're looking at kind of browsing and saying, okay, what are their services at a high level? What are your about us at a high level? And then trying to get to your hours and or your contact details, maybe your location. E-commerce websites are the websites that see higher user engagements because users are probably comparing products, going through the checkout process. But you'll find for static based websites or service based websites, rather, that the numbers are less than a minute for user engagement, often less than 30 seconds. Here we have engaged session per user. Now, this metric can be a little confusing. We're going to call this an advanced metric. Basically, what they're saying is this is the average overall for all those 200 users. This is the same 28-day period. What they're saying is per user, the average is 0.38 of a second. So it can be a little tricky because it's engaged sessions per user. So if somebody comes back, again, there were 5 people that generated more than one session. This number is where that's being driven to. It can be a little complicated. So what I always tell folks is start with your average engaged time, focus on that. And then when you get comfortable with it, then you can get into the breakdown of sessions per user. But I don't know how much this is going to help you unless you're an e-commerce website trying to see if returning clients are spending more or less time. Here is your general average. And when you go into the report, it breaks it down a little further around it. There's a lot of averages here. You're like, which one do I pay attention to? Start here. Your average engagement time is very important because you want to know how long users are spending on your website. Then you have at the very end users in the last 30 minutes. I went to this website. It's my website. I went there to generate a number so you can see. This gives you a little bit more of a almost real time data on this website. I'm almost thinking after my classes, when I go look at my website data, if I looked in the last 30 minutes, often there is a spike because people are looking at the website and you'll see the average engagement time doesn't change much. So this is a way that you can see, and you can see which page I went to, which is in this case, my homepage. I'll show you in another report how you see that a little deeper. So when you're looking at your event count, remember an event is a scroll, a click, they played a video, went through your media carousel. So basically user activity. In the last 28 days, there were 341 views. Now, views get crazy again because you're like, what does that mean? That's your page views. They've gone through the different pages of the website. You can see in this report here, it gives you the page views of 341 that matches the views here. So views equals page views on this particular report. Of those 341 page views, within that was 969 as the event count. You'll notice that's the same number we saw on a previous report. So a lot of what you'll see on the new Google for Analytics is the same metrics showing up in different places. Google's tried to make it a little bit more meaningful for you so you don't have to then start to compare reports. They've put the metrics together. So in the last 28 days, there was almost 1,000 activities on my website from scrolling, clicking. You can actually see here, this gives you a specific example. 341 page views is one event. 228 session starts. That means that, remember, one user generates one session, and we don't have to worry about that midnight crossover causing a double event. First visit, so there was 200 users that came for the very first time, and then 200 users or 200 user engagement points, meaning clicks, scrolls, video plays on the website, and or media carousels. And you'll notice that if you add up all these numbers, you get 969. So I just want to reiterate that. When somebody asks you or you're confused about what is an event on my website, in the engagement overview, you have an event count, and you can see here event count by event name. So you know what your different events are and how they generated activity. When you go to your landing pages, so this goes back to, all right, so many people came and they generated so many page views. So if we look back at this previous report, there was 341 page views. The 341 page views break down as follows. You can see here the page title, and it says screen class. You can't really see it on this report. You would click view pages and screens in order to see the deeper breakdown of those different pages. Now, this can get a little confusing to read because it doesn't tell you the link. What it's giving you is the SEO title that you defined for your page. So in this case, I know that that first one, EdgeSpace Marketing with the pipe, then it says digital marketing, is my homepage. Underneath that is about, contact us, portfolio, and then events, which would be my classes on my website. So you'll notice, if you set up your SEO titles in a way that you can understand it, your user should be able to understand it, you'll then know what page they landed on your website. You then get to see user activity over time. This report can be a little confusing, so we often ignore it. Basically, all it's saying is that of those 341 user sessions, these are the different days within that time frame they were highly active, and then they're giving you 30-day overlaid 7 overlay a single day. It doesn't really help. We find that more people are confused by this report than it's insightful. So this is one I'm going to put in the advanced category, that if you don't understand this report, you don't necessarily need to use it. Focus on this report where you can see what pages are getting the most activity on your website. So, for example, if you're an e commerce store and someone looked up your product and you notice that your product pages are ranking higher than your home pages, that's pretty good because you're shortcutting the process to get you to check out. One less click for that user because they're finding the products you need. If you're an e commerce website and you're seeing a lot of homepage and about us and services, if you have services or maybe FAQs, but you're not getting a lot of clicks onto your product page, then this is where we now need to think about, is it hard for the user to find the products? Does the product description create more confusion than help the users? Maybe we've missed the target on understanding what the users' needs are in terms of how we've laid out the product description or even the way you've named your product. That's how this particular report can help you understand where the users are going. You have to think about where you really want them to go and how we get them there. So then you have event count again. So remember earlier there was an event count that was part of the engagement. Here is a deeper report on event count, and essentially it's the same. This bar graph, well, is it a bar graph? Line graph, sorry. This line graph and this bar graph are the same. It's literally just giving you the information in a different way that maybe you can understand a little bit better. In one of the previous reports, it was just a list with a bunch of numbers, where some people find that confusing. I personally like this graph where the bar graph is very clear to me. When I see these squiggly lines, it kind of gets confusing over which color is which one, because some of the lines are very similarly colored and it's, for me, a little harder to track visually. I like this report. But as we said before, these are all the same. So page views was 341. You'll notice that. And then the session starts, I don't remember the exact number, but first visit and user engagement were both equal to 200, which is what you see here. So again, this report and this report are the same, which is also the same as the previous event count report. Now, the other thing that we always want to think about is retention over time. How often do people return to your website? So here's a breakdown. Again, same 28-day period, but this is laid out slightly differently, and this number is slightly different than the previous report. So what you would want to do is dive into either of the reports and see what the differences are. But what this report is saying, in the last 28 days, 200 users came to the website, and of them, 13 were returning users. So that doesn't necessarily mean that those 13 were returning in the same 28-day period. That could also count users that returned from previous time frames at some point. This one can get a little tricky in terms of the returning users, where a different report had only 5 returning users. You'd have to take a deeper dive into your reports to see the difference in terms of which one is comparing the previous time frame to the exact time frame that you're looking at. So before we get into the Q&A, let's talk about what are some actionable things you can do now that you've understanding your metrics, you understand your report. Now you want to know, what do I do? So the first thing you want to do is consider leveraging segmentation to uncover hidden trends within segments of specific user groups. So you can segment by the device that they're coming from, location they're coming from. This is where you get into some of those, customizable reports. Again, I'm going to put this in what's called the advanced user category. Not everyone understands Google Analytics enough to segment their user groups, and often it's not necessarily needed if you are a small business with a very specific user base. What you can do is analyze your user journey and pinpoint friction points that impact conversion. So if you're looking at your reports, again, using the e-commerce example, and you're seeing users are landing on all the pages except your product pages, then you know that something is causing them to not convert or get to the products. And so you have to kind of dive into this a little bit more and figure out, why is it that users didn't get where they wanted to go? And is it the hard to get to? Is it confusing? Those type of things. You want to assess your engagement metrics to identify content or features that are underperforming. If you're writing blogs and you're not getting traffic to your blogs or page views to your blogs, things to consider are your blog topics actually relevant? Now, if your blog topics are relevant, maybe you're not using the right compelling language to bring them there. Maybe your blogs are too generic. We see that often where people use ChatGPT or Google Bard to generate blogs, but they don't look at the generic nature of which the content is produced. So if you're using those AI features, make sure you take a deeper look at them and you customize them so that they are very specific to your target audience. It's one of those things. To give an example, if you want to talk about decluttering a home, don't just say now's a great time to declutter your home and then don't give them any details. What is your specific angle? Is your angle to give them tips that are actionable, where the how to declutter? Are you giving them mental health tips around why decluttering is important? This is why knowing your target audience is important. And if, let's say, you wrote two different blogs on the topic, you can then see which blog is performing and which one's not. It can give you some insights in terms of how your clientele is resonating with the work you're doing. If you have a mobile app, if and a website, you can then use the insights to see which ones are working well and which is not. So for example, using e-commerce as an easy example, if you have a website and you see people are going to the product pages on your website, but you have a mobile app and people are not going to the product pages on the mobile app, which is your intention, then now you can look at your reports to see, okay, which one is the user engaging with, and then try to deduce why users are falling out of the conversion process at a different point. Is your app laid out in a different manner to your website? Is your app providing, things like pop-ups, which are even on the website? It could be vice versa. People don't like pop-ups. One of the biggest things that people do is they put these big pop-ups for get this much off a product or join our mailing list. And I don't know about you, but I have cracked my phone screen and I can hardly ever hit the X, or I can't find the X. So what do? I hit the back button and I've left the website. And chances of me going back, unless I'm really, really compelled to or really interested in what was on that website, I'm probably just going to click a different link from my Google search. So, one thing you want to be careful of is our pop ups. And if you're looking at your reports, pop ups can be an indicator of if you're seeing traffic fall off or you're seeing low engagement rate. Remember, you no longer have a bounce rate to tell you that. If you can, personalize the web and app experience based on user behavior and preferences. So, if you're finding that using e commerce, if you have a product based website and you're finding that users are always going to one product over another one, make sure that they can quickly get to that product from the home page if you're seeing that as a user behavior trend and if you want to continue to drive in that direction. Maybe there's another product you'd have rather drive up, so maybe you need to feature both on the website. One thing to keep in mind is that if you are going to feature one and it's working really well, don't deprioritize it for another one that you want to perform just as well. Make sure users who are engaging with that original product or content can continue to quickly get access to it because it was working for you. You want to make sure that, if possible, leverage the Google Analytics for machine learning for predictive insights so that you can figure out how to guide those personalizations. Again, as we said before, the space is there in your Google Analytics that says insights, but I have yet to see actual actionable insights coming out from that section. And then when we do figure that out, according to Google, we can get automated reports and alerts so you can stay on top of the data driven insights. I haven't seen this in action myself yet, but the capability is supposed to be there. So, Bud, we can open up to questions now.
Okay, Nalini, would you like to have me read them to you, or do you want to field it all yourself?
Sure, I'll just go through the list. Uh,
Yours to do.
Thank you. So the first question, and I'm going to ask this attendee if they can clarify. It says, "Is Firebase necessary or have a preferred competitor?" I'm not familiar with Firebase, so if you could please clarify, that would be very helpful so that we could see how to answer that question. The next one says, "I've entered my product info into Google Merchant. But when I search test it, the majority is constantly mixed up with another company's product or web address, obviously affecting Google Analytic 4 results. Who do I contact about this craziness? Now, for this attendee, what you're probably seeing is your SEO competition. And so those products that are showing up when you're trying to test are probably having better traction. They might have a more compelling description. They might be running Google ads that can make them show up before yours. So I don't know that there's anyone per se to contact, as much as you might want to look into your SEO and seeing how you can use your Google Analytics numbers to try to optimize your content a little bit more. How can I prevent Google from sharing every single product? I only want specific products chosen, please and thank you. So, this is an interesting one because the question always becomes for me, why are you selling a product that you don't want to be found on Google? The reality is that you're selling it for a reason and users probably want that. So, Google is indexing everything on your website. You can set up things as no index on the specific product page, and Google won't index that, or it shouldn't index that. If you set it up in Google Merchant per the previous question, then you would want to take it down from Google Merchant. So if you have a very specific reason for not wanting it indexed, then you would set the product page on the website as no index. There was a question about the slides. The slides will be available through the YouTube, which will be live in the next 24 hours. Is that correct, Budley?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. The question here is Google Analytics gives a historic look at activity. How can one use analytics to modify their future website? So, things we've talked about today in terms of understanding user behavior, what type of pages they're clicking on, how long they're spending on pages. This is how you use that historical data to make future changes. What you're going to look at is how users are using your website today. Consider what your customer journey is supposed to look like in your mind in terms of how you wanted them to get there, and then think about how you want to tweak your website. So for example, if you have blogs that are very important, that maybe you need to put them as featured blogs on your homepage, or featured products, things like that we've mentioned. So just to reconfirm, Google Analytics is historical, but it's historical up to like yesterday. So you still have almost real time data to get a sense of how users are using your website. It's not like you're getting it 30, 40 days later. What percentage of a web page is usually seen in the 20 seconds a customer is visiting? What are the most frequent visit section of a website? This is going to be website specific. So it depends on how you built your website. It depends on how much effort you put into your SEO, and if your SEO had the right keywords. Often we find if you're not being found on Google for your business or website or products, it's your SEO keywords may not be tailored correctly to the end user. You might still be thinking like a business rather than thinking like the customer. Now, in terms of what's the frequently visited sections in a website, it's going to depend on the website. My website, I would have expected my portfolio page to get more traffic than it is, or even my services page. What I see in my analytics is that people come and they look at the homepage, the About Us section, and they go to Contact Us as primary. Those are my top 3 pages. And that's okay. That's how I want my marketing to work. I don't specifically have my marketing set up for people to find me on Google and wonder what I do. I have classes like this where you guys already know what I do, and you're really probably validating and or checking what I do. So for the question at hand is, it's going to depend on the website, and it's going to depend on how you design the website and how users engage with the way the website is designed. This is interesting. The question says the color on the line graphs are not ADA compliant. Why isn't Google required to follow the ADA compliance rules? Just wondering. No, I can't speak for Google. What I can say is we are all required to follow ADA compliance rule, Google included. So they probably just haven't been flagged or fined yet. And somebody in their marketing department is not paying attention to those rules. Because I agree, half the time I'm confused by the reports with the bar graphs because they all look identical. You can't really tell which line belongs to which. So hopefully one day maybe you can put in if you can find a way to contact Google, you can let them know they're not in ADA compliance. But we are all required to follow ADA compliance rules. Can AI apps evaluate or analyze GA4 stats? There's probably apps available in terms of which ones are state of the art. I haven't heard of any yet specifically. In terms of which ones work well, also haven't heard about any specifically just yet. That doesn't mean they're not being developed or being tested right now. There's probably some floating around. So you could probably easily Google AI apps to analyze your GA4 analytics and see what you get. Part of it is what I suspect is Google has something called an API. It's an interface that you can connect to and pull the data. So these AI apps would have to pull the data from Google in order to analyze it. Google charges how often you can pull those APIs. And so it could be a thing where it's cost prohibitive or it's not yet budgeted for. So I do suspect and expect we're going to have more and more apps on the horizons that can provide this analysis for us. I just don't know that there's any yet that are state of the art or considered best practices. What is the big difference between having an app versus configuring your website on a mobile device? To me, this is about the user experience. Every website should have a mobilely accessible version of their website, but not every website needs a mobile app. The mobile app is really for engagement purposes. A specific example of this could be Netflix, right? Netflix has their website where you can watch things on your computer. And for them, creating a mobilely responsive website is probably a little more challenging because you're trying to lay everything out in, a vertical format versus horizontal format. So for them, creating an app which allows them to enhance the user experience because apps are specifically designed to be in this vertical and or convert to landscape. So it gives them much more functionality, whereas websites have a certain way they work. I know that's not really a specific answer, but websites have a way they work functionality wise, and apps give you more functionalities or ability to do different things. So it really is going to depend on whether or not you have the need for further engagement with your users. My type of website, I'm a service based business. I have no need for an app. If I had an app, the app would probably be, play replays of my classes. And then you do that. But you also have to think about, I don't know about you, but I'm always running out of space on my phone. So I kind of get annoyed if I have to download an app where a mobile version of the website would have been sufficient. And so again, when you talk about brand loyalty, you do want to think about what the customer's feelings might be about downloading another app that doesn't really enhance their experience. So consider that. The next question here is, how is UA4 and all the new information presented in UA4 be usable to help us better advertise on Google and our other social media channels? So I think here the question really becomes is, to distill it down, how do you take the information your Google Analytics for to create an advertising plan for whether you're using Google Ads and or social media channels? What you're going to want to do for your Google Ads is work with somebody certified in Google Ads. Google Ads is a little bit of a tricky space if you don't know exactly how to configure it because it's a pay per click model. So if it's misconfigured, you might be paying for clicks that aren't necessarily qualified for your business. An example could be you're a plumbing business and somebody looking for an electrician, something got misconfigured and they clicked your ad, and now you're paying for a click that's not qualified. So that's one way to think about it. In terms of how you use it to inform your other social media channels, an example of this could be you have blogs on your website, you look at the landing page report, and you see that you're not getting clicks on the blogs. So, what you can do is from social media, drive traffic back to the blogs so that you can increase traffic to the blogs. Product advertising is a little trickier on social media because folks have to be very, very compelled to want to buy it, but they might be more compelled to read something informative. This goes back to taking it a way step back further and understanding your demographic profiles of your users. What are their interests? What are their values? What are their pain points? And then making sure you're creating a marketing plan around that. And that relates to your website too, specifically with your blog section and or your product section. This question again is about the slides, which we've covered. The slides will not be emailed. They'll be part of the YouTube that you'll be able to watch at your own convenience in the next 24 hours. The next question is, it says, is it worth it to pay for SEO enhancements since I've done zero to make sure my site is actually being found? It's quite possible that you may need SEO enhancements. Sometimes, depending on who built your website and how they built it, It may not be necessary depending on your type of business, the competition for your type of business, your particular goals. What you might want to do is before you pay for SEO enhancements, have somebody do an SEO audit with you and maybe ask a few different companies to do an audit so you can get a sense of, what are they looking at, what are the commonalities, and then decide if you want to hire a company for enhancements on your SEO side. Every business can benefit from search engine optimization. For those of you not familiar with SEO, search engine optimization are the technical pieces of your website and the content of your website and how it factors into your website ranking on Google. And one of the biggest things we find, as I mentioned earlier, is that your website could be well designed, it could be beautiful, it could be mobily responsive, it loads in a very fast amount of time, yet your keywords are not tailored to your end user. And that's where you have to then start to dig into what are the keywords. And it really boils down to what is the reason that your user who needs to come to your website but doesn't know it yet went to Google to search something. And what you need to do is to be found among those search results when those users are searching for something. The last question is, or next question is, where do we find the YouTube link for the slides? But please correct me if I'm wrong. They're going to get an email. Those who registered for the class will get an email with the link, but it'll also be on the SCORE YouTube channel.
All of what you said is correct, Nalini.
Thank you. Reading the next question says, can you recap why we need to put that we collect analytics in our privacy statement? So the answer to this question is it's the law. The law says that we have to be transparent about how we track. So if you're using Google Analytics on your website, your privacy statement needs to say that we collect Google Analytics. There's a lot of boilerplate privacy statements for free that you can get on the internet that explains and breaks down how they connect that information. You can also pay for a service like Termly is one. I'm not advocating, just saying it's one I know of where they provide for nominal fee. They create the boilerplate for you. They tell you how to put it on your website, and then they track the different metrics or information you're supposed to track if somebody has an issue with how their data is collected. If you're using Google ads or something called trackbacks, those kind of things, meaning somebody goes to your website, there's a cookie placed on their computer, meaning to track if they come back to the website. Those are things you do have to disclose that you're tracking. That's why everybody's website now has a little cookie banner saying we use cookies on our website. You can choose to opt in or opt out, accept all, reject all. This is where some of that anonymized missing data in your Google Analytics come from, is that if users have their privacy settings set very high, you're not going to get the specificity you're looking for. Next question is there a way to control the analysis to drive more traffic to your website? Does your website look and feel reflect negatively to how many pages interactions you get? How can you improve your website to get more interactions? So those are a few questions in one. The first part being, can you control the analysis to drive more traffic to your website? Your analysis is kind of passive. So you can't really use the analysis in the sense of controlling it so that you get more traffic. What you will do is use the insights from your analysis to drive more traffic. So your website look and feel absolutely matters. There are things like click maps, and there's some deeper reports you can get into through Google where you can see how users use your website, the customer journey, those kind of things. The best thing to do is work with a web developer to find out if you designed it yourself, if you have questions about how that design look and feel can be optimized, or even just ask some of your users. Ask somebody not familiar with your business to give you feedback on your website and for an honest answer, and be open to different people are going to have different opinions and approaches to it. The question is, do we provide EdgeSpace Marketing provide SEO services? Yes, you do. If you go to edgespacemarketing.com, you'll be able to fill out a contact form, and we can get you guys going if you're interested in that. The last question in the Q&A, and then I saw that there's some in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as possible. How do you find out what other terms and conditions and privacy policies are needed on your website? You can just Google what is a generic privacy policy. Two things you need to keep in mind is everybody's website should have a privacy policy. If you have clientele that may or may not come from the United Kingdom or the European Union, you need a GDPR part of that. It's a paragraph. It's easy to put on your website as part of your privacy statement. And if your customers are also in California, you also need to have the California Privacy Protection Act statement disclosure in your privacy policy. You can easily Google the different terms and conditions and or privacy policies you need on your website. Let me see how fast I can get through the ones that are in the the
Well,
chat.
Nalini,
Go
we
ahead.
are running out of time.
Okay.
And with that said, um, as a reminder, a recording of this webinar and the materials will be available within the next day or so on our website under on-demand webinars. And as Nalini mentioned, by the way, you will be getting an email that has a link. Um, Our next live webinar is Thursday, April 25th at noon, and the topic is exporting as a business opportunity. Look for the specifics on fairfieldcounty.score.org. And again, SCORE offers free individual counseling, so please use the link on the screen or visit our website and click Request a Mentor. Also, please fill out your evaluations that have been sent at the end of the webinar. And on behalf of SCORE, I'd like to thank you all for attending today's live webinar. And in closing, a big thank you to Nalini for presenting today. And again, enjoy the rest of your day.